Hello, my name is Ben Jass. I am the 9 through 12 industrial technology teacher at Webster City High School. And today I'm going to be talking about the research that I conducted in my classroom. The title of my research paper was Increasing Vocabulary Acquisition in CTE Classes. So the purpose of my study was to see how different teachers could impact literacy scores in their individual classrooms. And the main focus of the research was on vocabulary acquisition in CTE classes. Industrial technology is a part of the CTE area, career and technical education, and vocabulary is something that we utilize on a daily basis. So I wanted to focus on that. The reason that I thought CTE was an important area to utilize in this research was the fact that typically we have more engaged and motivated students. All teachers have a responsibility to teach literacy in their classroom, and this was really emphasized to me with the English department. And so I wanted to do my job in order to help support that role. Literacy should not fall on just the English teachers, especially with the variety of ways in which I can create opportunities for students to learn in my classroom. Part of it was I also believe that all teachers should provide direct instruction to students. And the reason being is literacy affects our standardized testing scores. And so there was multiple motivations for me to choose this research topic. So my focus was more on Tier 3 vocabulary. So what is Tier 3 vocabulary? It is vocabulary that is domain specific and low frequency in use. CTE classes, including industrial tech, have vocabulary that's almost like a new language. Typically you hear it called language of the industry. And what we're doing is we're trying to build a student for success in the real world. Many times the students that we have go directly into the workforce or into a 2-year program. And so for them to gain this language before they go into that field, it's really important for them in order to be as successful as possible. And then just to restate the fact, we wanted to increase literacy through direct instruction. So what I was going to provide was direct instruction of Tier 3 vocabulary to my students. As part of the literature review in my research report, I found that there was very little information about the subject areas in CTE. CTE is an area where all students can be successful. It's all inclusive. We have all ranges of students and abilities. We have students that are very bright, and everything comes very easily to them, to students who struggle with reading or various concepts. But the best part about CTE, industrial tech specifically, we provide a lot of hands-on learning and projects, and we are able to combine those with technical reading and vocabulary acquisition. So we're able to teach literacy in a way that is unique in that aspect because we're actually doing a lot of transferable skills. And so my purpose is to design tasks that focus on vocabulary in my classroom. And then in turn, when we do our reading, we're reading for comprehension. We're using lab-based activities and doing a lot of real-world skills in which the vocabulary that is taught in the classroom is very important as we transition into other areas. And so as part of the literature review, I tried to find as much information as I could. And so there wasn't a whole lot of information in regards to the CTE area. One of the areas that there was a lot of research on and studies that had been done was in the area of technology. Webster City High School is a one-to-one school, and I wanted to incorporate that into my research. There was a lot of good research about the use of technology in regards to vocabulary acquisition. One study showed that sending text messages motivated students to learn and develop vocabulary. And another study had shown that computerized media can be helpful in learning a foreign language. And so I know that they were talking about a foreign language, but I kind of considered the vocabulary that we used in CTE, since it is a Tier 3 vocabulary, to be similar to that foreign language. So I thought those tied together well. And so for me, as I continued to progress into my research, I thought that pairing technology with vocabulary development would be an effective way to go about in creating the treatment that I used. I did have some very specific goals and objectives. I did not want to change the structure of my classroom greatly. I wanted to make it very easy. And so I thought using a 3-minute starter activity with the technology that we had, our iPads, and also I wanted to incorporate partner work. I thought that would be a great way to increase our vocabulary assessment scores. I did want to find a treatment that would work in other CTE areas or other subjects with Tier 3 vocabulary. My goal also was to impact standardized test scores at my school district. As a part of my individual career development plan, I focused on that with my principal, and we were able to use the literacy scores within our school and our students as another factor within, the choosing of this research. And then the last goal that I had was to impact my students so they're better prepared for the transition from high school, whether that is to a community college or directly into the workforce, or even some of my students are going on to 4-year schools. The various methods that I used in order to do my research, one of the areas that I wanted to focus on was the research design. And so one of the things that I had found was that experimental research design has been shown to be ideal for groups of 20 or more students. It allowed for careful manipulation of the independent variable, which was my treatment that I was going to utilize in the classroom. And then part of experimental research design was that it allowed for interpretation of cause and effect. The participants in my study were my 34 high school engineering students. The percentages of students as far as their race was broken down very typical of Webster City High School. And so that was kind of nice to see, like, if the research showed that the treatment worked well in my class, it could potentially work well in other areas of our school. I did have 33 males and only 1 female, and I'll talk a little bit about that as a limitation later on. But all the students did have a background in algebra, and most were considered upper level students, and they all had an interest in a career in engineering. Some of the materials that we utilized were the iPads that every student had. Students also have access to an email that the school provided. And then I used Quizlet.com to run all my vocabulary through that website because it's very easy for me to push that email out to students on a daily basis. And if you look there on the slide, there is an example of the flashcards that I used. So you see a line dimension as the vocabulary word and then the definition of that vocabulary word. And that's where students would work together on using those flashcards on a daily basis. So my procedure on a day-to-day basis was for the first 3 minutes of the class period, students would get 5 new vocabulary words per day. And the students would come in, they would be partnered up, and they would review the words together. There's an example on the slide there as well of the 5 vocabulary words and kind of what they looked like on a day-to-day basis. Once a 3-minute starter was finished, we resumed our normal classroom routine. So what I thought was nice about this was I could get students engaged right away. We could focus on a specific skill and then continue on with our day-to-day operations. Students did get 5 new vocabulary words per day until all of the words within a unit were utilized. And then they would get some more time before we took the assessment to go back and review those words together. And so it was only for 3 minutes during the course of each phase, but students did get a good basis of the vocabulary that we were trying to assess. The assessment was a multiple choice assessment, and I utilized Quizlet for that as well. And on the screen you can see an example. And in phase 1 we had 56 multiple choice questions, so that took 15 days to go through. Phase 2 only had 35 vocabulary words. So that was, I believe, only took 11 days to go through phase 2. Once the kids took the assessments, I collected the scores in an Excel document, calculated the mean, and gathered the data to be plugged in for data analysis. The results were positive when I just looked at the mean scores. During phase 1, group 1 received the treatment, and group 2 did not receive the treatment. And their scores, as you can see, in phase 1, group 1 that received the treatment averaged 85.95% on their assessment scores. Group 2, without the treatment, averaged 83.62%. In phase 2 of the study, both groups received the treatment. And it shows, according to the mean that was calculated, that both groups saw an increase in the assessment scores that they had. I thought initially this was a very positive result, but once I ran the data analysis through the JAS program, I found out a little bit differently. I did have a hypothesis that students would attain higher assessment scores when given a vocabulary treatment, and I conducted that with a repeated measures ANOVA, and this was recommended by Morningside professors. We did come up with a p-value of 0.572 when groups 1 and groups 2 were compared. This indicated a null hypothesis, and part of the mean scores improving was a positive result as far as the treatment being utilized in class, but this statistical data analysis has shown that it was a null hypothesis. So here's the implications for my research. There was not a lot of research in a CTE area, so this was significant even with a null hypothesis. I thought it would be helpful for other CTE teachers that use Tier 3 vocabulary, and I wanted to increase literacy scores for state testing that was done at our school, and I really wanted to prove that this treatment was effective. There was several limitations of the study. Obviously the length of the study was very short. I think it was about 6 weeks in length and only had 2 phases. I had a small sample size, and there was a lack of females involved in the study. One area that I probably should have utilized was a pre-test and post-test. A quote that I had found showed that research shows that a pretest given before a treatment has more validity when the treatment is identified as successful. And then another limitation was this is my first time doing research of this manner. Recommendations for future research would be to use the treatment in other CTE classrooms so I could have more females in the study. I could have a larger sample size for data analysis, and then it would allow the researcher to gain more experience in this area. I would also use pre-testing and post-testing in my future research. Here's the references that were in my presentation. Overall, I found that this was a very meaningful research for me, as it directly impacted my classroom. Its vocabulary is something that we utilize on a daily basis, and I plan on continuing to utilize this sort of treatment in the future and continue to tweak and modify to see what works best for my students. Thank you.